We have two individuals here presenting this great topic. One is Patti Stammer, who is a local photographer, teacher, and writer who has raised her family in Humboldt County. When her daughter recently helped her in-laws write an obituary for a beloved grandfather, she asked how I would feel about writing mine now, since her family realized they didn't know a lot about her history or her final thoughts. And that led to many discussions on how, when, what to say, and what to do with it when you're finished. And then, of course, our second speaker is veteran newspaperman Jack Durham. With 30 years of journalism experience, he's the editor and publisher of the Mad River Union. He started his journalism career at HSU and worked as a reporter for the student newspaper, The Lumberjack. After college, he worked as a stringer for the Willits News, then as a full-time reporter for the Daily Democrat in Woodland. He returned to Arcata in 1994 and became the news editor of the Arcata Union. In 1996, he started the McKinleyville Press, which merged with the Arcata Eye in 2013 and became the Mad River Union. We look forward to this presentation. Thank you both.
Thank you.
All yours.
Really pleased to be here. And it's true, this started with a phone call from my daughter, and after I stopped laughing, I thought, what an opportunity this is. And she said, you don't think that's morbid or anything? And I said, no, I'm so happy somebody asked me, because she and my sister's 8 years younger. My daughter is, a lot younger. And I realized they knew nothing of my life before, anywhere. And not that I care that anybody knows where I went to second grade and any of that business, but I do a writing group at the senior center in McKinleyville. So when this came up, I sort of did an informal poll, and I said, what do you think about this? And I thought for sure they were going to say, ooh, and everybody just said, what a great idea. And I said, the more I look into it, the more I realize how many things there are that we don't really know what to do or why to do it unless you have a trust or a lawyer in your family. There's a whole lot of stuff that you don't really think about. And so I talked to Jack about it, and he is the obit writer extraordinaire for a lot of years. And so we decided to kind of break this up. And for me, the biggest surprise was not that you need an obituary or really how to write one, but it was all the stuff that you don't think about when you're thinking about moving on. And so I thought I would just sort of talk a little bit about some of the stuff that I never thought of. And I found this book called, and sounds a little weird, but it's called I'm Dead, Now What? And I found it in a local store, and I thought, this is great. It's like a notebook of how to tidy up your life. And so I'm going to tell you some of the things that were in this, and they really are things that I did not think of. And the first one was, it never occurred to me to give anybody an updated list of people to call when I'm gone. And I went through an old address book the other day that I found in a drawer, and a lot of those people have already passed, and I for some reason I couldn't throw it away, so it's back in the drawer, but that's neither here nor there. So it's like you need to make a list of people for your family to call when it's time to move on. And the next thing is to get all your medical records in order, who your doctors are. Make sure you have an advanced healthcare directive signed, lists of your prescriptions, all of that kind of business, because a lot of that stuff, the prescriptions especially, will refill automatically, and you'll be getting prescriptions a year later if you don't stop that. So, and a safety deposit box. My daughter says, well, I know you have one, but where's the key? And it just never occurred to me to tell anybody where I know where it is, but it's not going to do my heirs any good. So if you have a safety deposit box, put stuff in there you want your kids or your heirs to find, and tell them where the key is. And somebody said, well, I don't want them to just come in there or anything. And I said, well, then if you have a safe, lock them in the safe and give somebody besides your family or your lawyer or somebody, give them the key to the combination, and then they'll have all this information. And, you know, some people are, you never know about family relations, and you never know who's going to be in your house looking around. And so it's always kind of best to compile that information and put it someplace that makes you feel comfortable. So you don't have to worry about it, or you shouldn't even have to think about it. And if you have a will, you need to put it someplace where people can find it. And if you don't have a trust set up, or you haven't done a lot of work with an attorney, you need a place where you put all this stuff with a big note that says, you know, when I'm gone, you'll find all this stuff here. And I don't know, I've just never had enough to worry about to, you know, put together a giant estate planning. That's just not who I am. But I have a lot of stuff, and I would like to know somehow, you know, where it's going to go. So in there with that will, you need every document you have, your birth certificate, your marriage certificate, death certificates, your address book, and put that with your will. Also, something else I didn't think of is, if you do a lot of work online, you need to let your family, give them your password so they can get at that stuff. And, you know, you can change them all. You know, you just need to deal with that in a way, because if they can't get into, you know, a lot of people, my groups write stories on the computer. And unless they print them out, which they do in my class, so I have copies, their families may never know about these amazing memoirs they're writing. So, you know, people need to know how to access all your digital stuff. Tax records, mortgages, loans, somebody owes you money, if you owe somebody money. And if you have an attorney or a doctor, you need somewhere to have complete contact information to all the people that your children or your family need to call up to ask questions, so they don't have to thumb through the phone book and try to figure out who your doctor is. And a lot of people already have this, but for me, I just didn't think of it. And so, you know, I see people nodding their heads like they've already done that. Well, good. You know, I hope everybody does, because it's really a big deal and it's important. And credit cards. If you have a lot of credit cards, you don't have to tell anybody anything, except it's good to have part of the account numbers on there, or have the cards in hand, so that you can contact those people and let them know you're going to cancel them, or if there's a balance due, or anything like that. And that includes, a lot of people are travelers, so they may have frequent flyer miles. And if you don't list that, they just go into a big pool and vanish. And, you know, I don't know, if you think of some other things, that was pretty much, those were the ones that surprised me. And, you know, I've left notes for my grandchildren and stuff like that. But when I got this little book, like I said, it's got a kind of a wacky title, I'm Dead, Now What? It's like a loose leaf notebook. And so you can sit there and watch your favorite TV show, prop back up in the recliner with a pencil, and just start writing things down. And so it gets done. It doesn't get left to the last minute. You had this thing and you wanted to fill it out, but you never did. So I just sat one day with a pencil, and I filled it all in pencil, just in case between now and if I look like I'm got one step out the door, I've at least filled part of it, but I can always change my mind. So, and I really strongly feel that when you're telling your obituary, or when you're writing it, this is the story of your life, and it's nothing more and nothing less. And it's your story to tell, whatever you choose to include, personal, or, you know, and Jack said, you know, you could just do a special event like the day you bowled a perfect game. It's just anything you want. But it also should not be a novel, and it's not your resume and a bunch of other things. Jack will talk about that. But one thing that occurred to me is when you look at obituaries, there's a lot of info, and most people tune that out, especially if somebody's had 47 grandchildren and all that's in there. But one of the things you can do now that DNA testing is so available at Ancestry.com and all the other places, if you really want to leave that legacy, if you have a big family, if you have people who are interested in genealogy, you can join Ancestry.com and you can leave a lot of that information there. And so from a, they'll be able to find you through birth and death records. But if you have an Ancestry account and you've got info in there, you can leave that so that people know, oh, 50 years from now, oh yeah, Uncle Matt was on, Ancestry.com. Let me go see what kind of work he's done. And I found that a lot of my younger cousins are really interested in that. And my sister kind of takes care of that, which I'm happy about. But that's, I don't know, families who are grieving, they want to honor your passing, but they're grieving and it's hard for them. So as much information as you can leave about who you are and what you'd like and who you want to tell, that's the gift you give to your family with a really well-written obituary. And so I'm going to let Jack chat a little bit about that because he's the guy who writes them, and he's broken it down so that it's really easy. That I just always thought, where do you start? What do you say? Who do you? I just couldn't figure out how to do it, and he's got it down. He's got a thing. So Jack, you got anything to add to this list?
No. So with an obit, you could write it a lot of different ways. You could write a letter. It could be in first person. You could write an epic poem. Maybe you could make a rap song. And if you can pull that off, that's great. I would suggest a standard obit. A standard obit, you're going to write it in third person, which is kind of fun. So third person, you're not going to write, I did this and I did that. You're going to say, Jack Durham did this and Jack Durham did that. Let's talk about some of the things you need to include. And I feel kind of funny saying this because, I'm going to say, like, include the name and your name. And you're going to be able, well, that's obvious. Why are you telling me that? Because people actually submit obits to me that don't have names. That's actually happened. You want to, back to the name, you want to think about, do you include your nickname? What if you have a maiden name? So you do need to think about that. You need to have some really basic information. The date of your birth, where were you born? Who are your parents? The date of your death. Now you're writing your own obit, you probably don't know that, but include at least leave an XXX in there where people can fill that in. So let's get the ball rolling. Let's do a sample obit here. And I'm going to just use a name, John Doe Jr. So we could just start off with a real basic format of an obit. John Doe Jr. died February 27th, 2020 in McKinleyville. He was 80 years old. John Doe was born March 7th, 1940 to John and Mary Doe of Sacramento. So that would be like your really basic beginning of an obit. But we can jazz that up. And one of the things we want to do is look at, look at who you are. How would you describe yourself? Are you, in my case, you introduced me as Jack Durham, veteran newspaperman. Maybe you are a lifelong teacher, a world traveler. Maybe you invented the Post-it note. If you invented the Post-it note, you have to include that in the beginning, right at the beginning of your obit. Maybe you're a Grammy Award-winning musician. So let's take this John Doe Jr. guy. We're going to say that what did he do? He spent his whole life being a teacher, and he loved to travel. So the beginning of his obit, we can just go say, John Doe Jr., a lifelong teacher who loved to travel, died February 27th in McKinleyville. He was 80 years old. And then we include, where he was born and his parents. And then I was telling Patty, I kind of look at it as a sandwich. So you have the little beginning. The beginning gets you started. It has your name. It has when you were born, where you died, and your parents. And then, so that's the sandwich. That's the first slice of bread. And then at the bottom, we have the other slice of bread, and that's going to be all the stuff of you were survived by, who predeceased you, your services. Of course, you may not know that, although some people do plan that ahead. All the people you want to thank, and who the charity that you're going to donate to. So those are the two pieces of bread. There's the top and there's the bottom, and in the middle is the meat, and the meat is the fun part. And obviously with obits, you tend to go chronological. So you were born, you went to school, you went to college or whatever, and then you had your career and your family and who, your marriages. And so that's going to be the meat of the obit. And this is where it gets kind of interesting, because what do you include? And one of the things I would say is, this is not a resume, because you're dead. You're not going out and getting a job. So you're not trying to impress people with every award you got. What you actually want to do is put the most interesting and meaningful parts of your life. And so, those are going to include some obvious things. That's going to include, if you went to college and you got a degree, that's probably something you're proud of and you want to include. And maybe you had a master's thesis, go ahead and mention that. But don't include the entire master's thesis. Nobody wants to read that. Anyway, I'm kind of jumping around here, but one of the things we want to talk about is length, because you could write a book about your life, but you're not going to, first of all, you can't afford to publish that in a newspaper, because newspapers do charge. So you're going to want to be selective. And how many words would an obit be? Well, I don't know, 500 words. We run obits that sometimes are 250 words, some are 500, some are 1,000. There's been ones that are more than that. I would shoot for 500 to 1,000 words. And then, so that means you're going to have to be very selective about what you put in there. I would suggest, obviously, your marriage, if you have that, some big accomplishments. The other fun thing to do, in terms of how you might do this, you might start by doing those two pieces of bread. You got the beginning stuff and you got the ending stuff. And that's the hard stuff that your family members may not actually know that. I've always told people that I was born in San Mateo, and I was looking at my birth certificate. I was born in Redwood City. See, I just assumed that. And, you want to kind of work out all that stuff, get the spelling of the names right and everything. And then what I would suggest is take a notebook. This is going to be separate from your obit, and just start writing down, all the things in your life that you thought were important. A little tip here is maybe put yourself in a historical context. Where were you when JFK died? Where were you on September 11th? Things like that. And just write it down. You may not end up using this in your obituary, but just put it in a notebook, write all this stuff down, and then go back and look at what's interesting and what's meaningful to you. And then go ahead and put that in your obit and edit, take stuff in, put stuff in, take stuff out. So that's a good way of doing it. Also try to think of something perhaps unusual. So when I grew up in a household that was it was like Leave It to Beaver. My mom was a housewife. She stayed home. She took care of us. We even had a white picket fence. At the time, that just seemed totally normal. But nowadays, that might be unusual. So you might want to, that might be, if you can find those little things that are unusual, you might want to include those. You used to walk to school 10 miles through the snow. Include those kind of details. The other thing is, I think you should think about who your reader is. And I've kind of broken it down into different readers. So first, there's your friends and family. So I like to think of it as when you have this obit, you're kind of consoling them. And the way you're consoling them is saying, look, what a great life I've had. So yeah, you died and that's sad, but you've had this great life, and you're going to demonstrate that in your obit, hopefully. And I'm hoping that you had a great life. The other person you want to write for is your great, 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 great grandson or distant cousin. The person 100 years from now is going to look at your obit, and that person should be able to learn a lot about. The person's doing their genealogical research. They want to know who their ancestors were. I hope that your obit can inform this person 100 years. You're creating a historic document in a way. So that's another reader. And then the other reader I think of is the stranger or the person you barely know. You go to the grocery store every week and there's that person you say, hey, how's it going? And, you say hello, but they don't really know you. So I would like that person to pick up the obit and, look at the photo and go, hey, I know that guy. He shops at my store. and who they read the obit, and hopefully it's interesting too. So that's, that's one of my things. Think about the reader, and think about the reader. I'm not saying your obit has to be like a Tom Clancy novel where it's super highly entertaining, but it should be interesting. And so try to scrub out the boring things. It's obviously it's going to be, what's important to you. And so just, you're going to need to edit this thing down. And especially if you sit there with your notebook and you start writing your life story, there's probably all sorts of interesting episodes. Then the other thing I was going to mention is a few years ago, I read Keith Richards' book, Life. And after I read it, I was thinking about how the best part of that book is the scandalous stuff. I don't care about the nice part of Keith Richards' life. It's all the scandal stuff. And so I was thinking, and I thought about it, how people love to read that stuff. So I'm not saying you have to do this, but if you were arrested and you went to jail, consider including that in your obituary, because that's probably a good story. If there was criminal activity or something like that, you don't have to include it, but I would just recommend that you think about it, because those failures, maybe it's failures. Yeah, they're failures. They're things that maybe went awry in your life and then set you on a new path. And those actually are probably the most interesting parts of your life. So you may want to consider including that. And I just, like I said, this isn't a resume. So what you want it to do is be an interesting, truthful account of your life. And yet you get to self-edit. And that's the beauty of writing your own obit, is you get to tell the story of your life. What were the important things to you? Your family may think that some things are important, but maybe to you they're just trivial stuff. In the big picture, as you come to the end of your life, some of those things, who cares? Maybe you got an award, you don't care. So try to focus on the things that you think are important. And of course, I always notice anytime I've in an obit, it's always like family and friends. Those are the important things. So you'll want to include that. And then I was talking to Patti about how, when you go to a funeral, there's usually the service, and the service can be kind of dry and uninteresting sometimes. But then the best part is when people start telling stories, and that's where people are laughing and crying, and they're telling the great stories, the camping trip up in the mountains, and how everybody had too much to drink and terrible things, funny things happen. Those are the stories that really mean something. So include stuff like that. Don't be afraid to be funny. If you can make your obit funny, and it doesn't have to be, but so that's some of my thoughts on it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Patti, did you have any other?
Well, I was going to say, in this group of the seniors I've been working with for a couple of years, they swap stories, and a lot of them are very intimate. And I have one who's started when she was born and through the Marines, and now she's 96. She has an incredible life. But one of the things they do is they share these stories. And one of my oldest friends, who is, school friend, is here for the weekend. And so we were talking about this, and you can do this with a friend, someone you've shared a lot of those adventures with. You can talk about, well, would embarrass you if I put that in my obituary? And they're actually kind of fun to do. And, if you're at odds with your family, you can leave a mess. And if you're the last one in your family, you can make stuff up. So it's, it's pretty loose, but it is kind of a fun thing to share with your friends. It's like campfire stories. And I'm not suggesting that, you need to be drunk to write your obit, but, sometimes if you're sitting around having a cocktail and you're visiting with friends, and you, like you say, you have your little notebook, oh yeah, I forgot about that time. And I'm with you. I think those stories are really the most entertaining, and they're the things that shed some light on you to your family that they might not know about. And
the other thing too, just a little trick, is if you're ever, it's kind of interesting to try writing under different circumstances. And one of them is if you're kind of like feeling emotional about something, and you're remembering someone who died in your family, and you're starting to get a little teared up, that's a great time to write. because your emotions are kind of raw, and you can just start writing that. And the fact that you're overly emotional actually, I think, helps your writing. And so some garbage will come out too. So you need to go back and edit. But sometimes, like in my case, when my dog died, the first thing I do is just get down and start writing a little tribute to my dog, and you're crying, but it's great because the words are just coming and coming and coming. And it's because you're in this raw emotional state, as where if you waited a couple days, now you're calmed down a little bit, and it's going to be a little drier. So that's just a little tip there. I said,
wrote an obituary for my cat.
What's that?
I said I wrote an obituary for my cat while I was waiting for my daughter to come and take her to the vet. And, I was just sitting there staring at her, and it's exactly that. I was crying, and she looked at me like, oh, let's hurry this up. And it was one of the better things I've written ever, because it was just right there, and I was just feeling that loss. And it was stories of how she was when she lived with me that nobody knew but me. And so it can be a cat or a dog or, a kid or whoever, but it's a fun thing to do. I mean, it's not fun, it's just enjoyable, especially if you have old friends, because there's always laughter.
And that's, I would suggest too, like for your own obit, maybe you'll do kind of a little rough draft just to get started. And then maybe, a friend will die, or a family member will die, and you'll start to go down this memory, thinking about all these memories. And that's a good time to start writing. And, you could fill a notebook page after page with memories of stuff, and then put it away, go back and look at it. And then you can pull some of that stuff out and put it in the obit. Anyway, let's talk about the sandwich. Okay. And I think for your survivors, some of the hardest stuff for them to get together might be the little information of the sandwich: the day you were born, where were you born, your parents, and how, putting their names on there properly. And then, all of the relatives, when they died. So that stuff is kind of like the heavy lifting of just getting all of those names in there. And so I would recommend you just do the very beginning, do the very end, and get that out of the way. Okay, then we can go back and we can look at, what do you want to mention? You don't want to mention every single thing you did. Every baseball team you played on in elementary school. It's just going to be too much. And I guess we should talk about length, go back to length, because let's talk about how much newspapers charge. Okay, so at the Mad River Union, there was a time when we never charged for obits. And when I started in this business, we never charged that. We just thought obits were important news for the community. But newspapers struggle, and they have to pay printing bills. So finally we came across where we run an obit for 250 words or less is free of charge for anybody. So we don't charge for that. If it's 251 to 500, we charge $100. If it's 500 to 750, we charge 200, and so on. And you can include a photo. I was talking to the publisher of the Times Standard. They charge about roughly $275 for the first 250 words, and then it goes up from there. And you can decide to be in multiple editions of the newspaper. They put you online forever. And then let's see, the Lost Coast Outpost, they run obits for free. So when you decide how long to write your obit, you're going to have these financial considerations. So one option you could do is write a short little 250 word obit, and that's your freebie. And you can have a longer one. So I don't know, if you wanted, you might want to I would put your obit in the paper that you've always read all your life. So if you've been a Times Standard reader and all your friends read the Times Standard, you should put it in the Times Standard. If you've been in the Mad River, you should do the Mad River Union. But you're going to pay for the length of your obit. So, that's going to be a consideration. When you talk about how long, I was saying 500 to 1,000 words. If you go, as it gets bigger and bigger, people are going to stop reading it. Unless it's got to be fascinating for them to keep reading after 800 words. So you're going to have to edit this thing down and make it tight. And that's why you're going to have to decide what parts of your life are worth telling about and what parts are just boring. And, so those are my thoughts on that.
You also have to decide how attached your children are to having every single kid in their family named in there, because some people, have a lot of children, their children have children, and then their children have children. And so the next thing you know, you've got 53 great grandchildren, and it just gets cumbersome. And you can list those as, beloved grandfather of, you can kind of stop somewhere with that immediate family. I mean, that's your choice. But, some people, if you don't list them and every little precious offspring, and your family, if that would offend them or not. And on putting your obit in different papers, I really agree with that. But you can also have your family buy a lot of copies of that newspaper and put them in with the note that they, send to friends and family, and they can send it to the people who are not within that newspaper, unless it's, one where they're not online. So I've gotten a lot of cards with newspaper obituaries inside, and I always appreciate that. It's just nice to hold something in your hand. But I'm sort of a dinosaur in the digital age. I like to hold something in my hand.
Yeah, and we often, people get an obit in the paper, and I usually say, hey, do you need a little stack of those? And they stop by the office, and we give them a stack of papers, and they can hand that out. Sometimes they hand them out at the memorial service. So, so we're real conscious of that. And the other thing, it doesn't always happen, but I actually do try to lay out the obit so it's a nice square. Why do that? Well, because I have this idea that someone might want to cut it out. And they want it to be, with the newspaper with ads, sometimes the ads are all jaggedy and, you don't always get a perfect square. But with obits, we actually try to make a square with the idea that the family's going to cut it out, maybe cut it out and put it in a scrapbook or something. So, yeah.
I noticed that. What a nice thing to do.
The other thing with obits, Patti described me as an obit writer, and I have written a bunch of obits, but most of the obits are actually submitted by family members. So, you get all sorts of, like I said, people leave off some basic information. It's not unusual to have an obit that doesn't say where the person was born, doesn't have their birth date, doesn't always have their death date. Sometimes it's just, Joe Blow died and he was 76 years old. And I gotta include some basic stuff. I always feel kind of like I'm being a jerk when I say this, but when you submit your obit, make sure it's in complete sentences. That seems obvious, but I get press releases and obits and everything that are basically lists, and what we need complete sentences, and always double check the spelling, and photos too. So obviously we include a photo with an obit, and my favorite is when it's a guy who's 80 years old, and there's a picture of him 80 years old, maybe 60, and then there's a picture of him from when he was served in World War II or something. And so those are fun. I think that's great for the readers, and so you should think about that if you're going to be writing your own obit, is to think about what photos would go with that and to include those. So that's just a consideration, because the my paper, the Times Standard, the Lost Coast Outpost, they're all going to want a photo.
So, my family, my relatives are all Southern, and they had a lot of kids. And when we started writing obits for my family, we realized that every single one of our grandparents, my sister and I, had 9 kids in their family. My father was one of 9. My grandmother's family had 15. My grandfather's family had 11. And so reading their obituaries, just trying to get all those kids in there, was actually, I was astounded because I didn't know, but trying to look them up, doing a little genealogy research, it was really helpful, really helpful. And I found copies of those obits in my grandmother's Bible, where a lot of our family information showed up. you know, she had a big old family Bible. And so I've kept it up and just trying to trace down a few people. That's so, people are really interested in that. And I don't know if it's just people are not, or move around more or rootless or whatever, but there's so many young people who really are wanting to know about the history of their family. So if you make it as easy as possible, it makes a huge difference, I think. But that's just, I don't know, maybe I'm just so old fashioned. I just think that's what they want. And they really don't. I don't know.
The other thing I would suggest too, and I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit here, but you know, just get a notebook and pick little spots in your life. Maybe you want to write about your time in college or your time in the military, and just start writing it down. Just write it all down. Pick different points in your life, times in your life where you had a life change of some sort. You went off in a different direction. You moved somewhere. You decided to start a new career. Write all that stuff down. Just go for it, and then have that's kind of a separate document than your actual obit. And your obit's over here, your notebook's over here. Write it all down in the notebook, then go through that notebook and see if you can take little parts out. Oh, this part here is really interesting, and oh, the rest of this is pretty dull. And then you can insert that into your obit. And like you said, your obit already has the basic information at the top, the information at the bottom, and now you're putting the meat in the middle here. And just start adding to that, subtract, you know, and it'll be kind of fun because when you start writing this life story, you may actually discover that things that you didn't think were important really were important, or that event that happened to you led, you know, this happened, and then, you know, there was this divorce, but that led to this, or you lost this job and now because you lost that job, you've got this new career. So, you know, just write all that stuff down and then pour over it, and you got to edit it and go through it.
So can you see this? I'm going to show you this book. I thought this was the most amazing thing, and I don't know if you can see it, but I called the publisher there in New York, and they were kind enough to just open up a bulk order for me, and they sent it, and they just said, you know, if somebody wants these, we'll send them to you, and they didn't charge tax or shipping or anything. So if anybody thinks they might want to mess with this, you know, it's just got these wonderful lists of and it's like a little loose leaf notebook, and it just brings up stuff. It was so helpful for me. It has places you can write your stories, and you know, if anybody's interested in one, I'm happy. I think I ordered 15 of them, and I'm also going to order another bunch to give them to all my family I mean, it seems like a weird Christmas present, but that's just me. And I'm a writer, so I would like to tidy all that up in one spot and not have to do it. Does anybody have any questions? Because you can leave them in the chat thing, or you can raise your hand, and Kim or Jane, I don't know if Jane's still in, can open up to see if you have any questions about
I'm
anything.
still here, and if you're visible, you can just raise your hand if anybody has a question.
It looks like Judy has a question.
Where's Judy?
I'm here. I often wonder why a person died, and it doesn't, you know, seem to include that in writing obituaries. Is that discouraged?
Oh no, I'm
What?
glad you brought that up, because that was on my notes over here that I forgot to read. And I think the first thing when you read an obit, the first thing you think is, well, why'd the person die? What happened? And so I consider that a gift to the reader. You put in your cause of death if you can. I think that's, you know, it's the first question. You know, if someone calls and says, hey, so and so died, the first question is how did they die? So yeah, I would, if you could include that, you know, right, and that goes right at the top. You know, so and so died on this date. He was suffering from cancer, you know, or something like that. So please, yeah, include that. It's your choice, though. You know, Patty and I were talking about this and all the things you should or shouldn't include. And the beauty of writing your own obit is you get to decide what goes in there. If something feels uncomfortable to you, you can take it out. But I would suggest that you do include that.
Patty, we have questions about how to obtain a copy of the book, if we want, and what does it cost?
It's it was $14.95, so it's $14.95. That's what they charge me, and my email address is pstammer@gmail.com. But I was going to say, a lot of people, instead of saying, "Oh, he died of cancer," they'll thank the doctor at the hospital in the, whatever ward they're in or whatever, and they can kind of put it in that way. There's a lot of room at the end of an obit to thank people, to thank friends and family who helped with, with hospice and all kinds of stuff. That's another way you can let people know without, he died of a heart attack. I don't know. Sometimes that's a little.
Well, and then the other question is, do you use the word died? And I personally, I think you should say so-and-so died. But of course, people use, passed on, went to the great beyond. All that's your choice. I'm kind of partial to the simple word died. There's a great question too in the over here. What do you do about divorces? And that's an interesting question. I mean, I don't know. I guess I would want the obit to be kind, because when you dealing with exes, it's really easy to kind of get a little mean, I guess, because a lot of relationships can end badly. But I've just seen people say, he married so and so, and then 10 years later he got a divorce and he married somebody else. So you could just say it, just put it out there. I don't see any shame in that. But that was a good question. What else do we have over here? Oh, there's important to mention, this is from Pam, that there are other outlets for your obit, and she's absolutely right, your hometown newspaper. So, maybe you live in McKinleyville, but you died, but you grew up in, I don't know, Fresno or something. So maybe you're right. Maybe you want to also put your obit in the Fresno paper to inform all your, friends that you have down there, but you might also have it in the local paper here. And she also mentions like an alumni magazine. That's a good idea. Also, nowadays with electronics, social media, you could put it on Facebook and, other outlets like that.
I think Pam still has a question. Pam, did you have a question? No? That was it? Okay.
I have a question. Do you find you have to edit things out of obituaries, and do you do that?
No, I actually, I find I have to edit the obituaries because, a lot of them there's all these misspellings and grammar problems and stuff, but I tend to take a hands-off approach to it. The family has gone over it, they've submitted something. And so I want to run what they submit. And of course now, because I'm charging, the 250 word or less obit is free. And there's not a lot, that's a pretty short obit, but it can be done. And then the longer ones, they're paying for the space basically. So, I know some people will include massive quotes from books and Bibles, and I don't recommend that people do that. It's your obit, you can do whatever you want. If you're going to include maybe a little inspirational quote that means something to you, go ahead if it's short. But these long passages from books, I don't think people want to read that. They want to know about you. They don't want to, read your favorite chapter from Hemingway. No, little quotes, fine, but don't make a big quote. So no, I edit for typos and try to make complete sentences. And other than that, it's kind of hands off. I've never had that I can recall an obit that had anything like really offensive. So no.
How many different places, part of what ought to be in what people's desires are, I presume, are where you'd like it published. Patty?
I'm sorry, what?
I would presume part of what ought to be in your booklet is where you would like to have it published.
So yes, there's a whole, This has got more information. I never thought of it. There's a thing at the time of my passing. Please contact my dependents, important documents, financial. And then there's my wishes. There's things in here about how to deal with your pets, personal property. You want something to go to somebody, you can put it in here, my pets, what to pay, what to close, email, social media. And then there's kind of my wishes, and you know, it's what you'd like to have. You know, do you want somebody to have a party? Do you want it catered? Do you want it just to be, you know, at the beach and plant some daffodils and call it a done deal or something? That's kind of up to you. I live a pretty simple life, so there's a lot of blank pages in here because my life is pretty. I just keep it pretty small. But I was going to say, I have 15 copies of this, and I have an open order with this company, so I can send them. And I did see a couple places that I think you can get one copy or two online, or you could ask Courtney at Blake's Books if you want to shop local, buy it out of the bookstore. You can order it locally, but you know, I bought 15 of them specifically for this purpose so people could have it. It really taught me so much that I didn't know, and you know, I just never and leaving a list of name and addresses for your friends to let them know. I don't know why that never occurred to me. My daughter just sent out graduation invitations for my oldest granddaughter who graduated and going to college. And she used the wedding list, the address book from her wedding, and I had to go back and make sure that my friends were, you know, their addresses were updated and that they knew what was happening. And, you know, I just hate to have people find out everything on Facebook. So it's, which is certainly an option because a lot of people their whole lives are on Facebook. And so you can put your obituary on Facebook if you want to.
I should tell you about one of the obits I wrote recently, and it was George Wheeler, who was on the McKinleyville Services District. He was a director, and he had cancer. And finally, you know, he knew his life was going to be over. So he calls me up and he says, "Hey, you know, I'm going to die pretty soon. I need you to interview me." So I was like, "Well, that's really weird." And so I went over his house and I thought, "Oh man, this is going to be terrible. This is going to be like the saddest thing in the world." And so I was really kind of apprehensive about even doing it and I get there and George is laughing and he's telling jokes and I interview him and, you know, he wants to talk about McKinleyville. He wants to talk about the things that need to be fixed in McKinleyville, the things he's done. And so we sat and you know, so then I think it was like a week later, I went home and I wrote it all up. And then I think it was about roughly a week or so later, his wife tells me, you know, he's died. And so I had to interview George about his life and wrote it up. And it was just kind of interesting because it, you know, I was expecting it to be, you know, this sad story of the final interview with George, who was a guy I really liked. But it was really more like it kind of came off as like a guy running for the MCSD who cares about community issues, because that's what he wanted to talk about. That was his final interview. And so, you know, I wrote it the way I just wrote it up the way George. I quoted him. I said, "This is what George talked about, and this is what he cared about in his final interview." So it was just kind of an interesting experience. It was not what I expected it would be like, and it was not. It was strange to me because I expected it to be a super sad experience, and it wasn't sad. Actually, George wouldn't allow it to be sad. So, you know, he was a happy fellow.
How wonderful that he trusted you to do that.
Yeah, it was, I got to tell you, you know, it's one of those things where you kind of get goosebumps thinking about it because you're like, well, here's George in his final days. And he's like, "Hey, come on over. I want you to tell my story." So it's like a great honor. I mean, what else can you say? It's really great.
Hey, real quick, Patty, a lot of people have, excuse me, put in the chat that they would like a copy of your book.
Yes.
Do you want people to send you an email? How do you want to do that kind of transaction so that
I think if you would send me an email with your contact information and I can call you, and I only ordered 15 because when I ordered these, when I put in the order initially, I thought we were going to do this at the senior center. And so, you know, I can figure out how to get them to you, or, well, you know, I don't know. I'm still wearing a mask and a little, I'm worried about the virus and stupidity at the same time. So I'm a little leery about going outside, but we'll figure it out. And they should be here tomorrow. I got a notice that they're going to arrive tomorrow. And so I live in McKinleyville. I can meet you there, or I don't know. We'll figure it out. We can, I don't know. Ollie, I just don't know how to, I didn't think that far ahead is what I'm telling you. I just wanted to get them here. And if, you know, I can just do the first 15 people on there, and they have an open order for me. So, because I thought, well, these would probably go on this. And then I do actually want to send them, you know, I'm 76 and my friends are, they're leaving. My address book is getting smaller and smaller. So I'm trying to order these for my friends and family, what's left of it, that I have that information and they have mine. So I can get them, and it was a very short time. I got them in less than a week. And if you want to do it right now, like I said, you can have Courtney, or Courtney Blake, she can order at Blake's, and I saw them on Amazon. I just wanted to get a lot of them, and I wanted to get them here quick. So that's why I ordered, you know, directly from them, and they were very nice. So I can do another batch. And I actually, I did what I suggested. I sat back in a big comfy couch, and I had a really nice glass of wine and a pencil, and I just sat down and I was watching TV and thinking, and just, you know, and something would come to me and I just write it down in this book, and it was so helpful. And it's, I have delivered a few eulogies lately, and I don't care for it personally, but you know, if it's a friend that you love, and you just kind of got to, you have to think about it. And I just never thought, I thought getting old would take longer, you know, and it's sort of thrown me into a little bit of a tizzy when my daughter mentioned this, because I thought, oh, for heaven's sakes. I don't know. I just kind of moved along and just never really thought about it until I'm writing obituaries for my cat and 3 of my best friends. And I'm thinking, oh, this is, because I better tidy up. So anyway, I will make every effort to fill it. And if you send me your name and address and phone number to that email, I'll just start down the list and make sure that you get them. And if I run out of them, I'll just put in another order. They really got here in a very short time. And if you've already gotten one, I'll call you, let you know, and say, oh no, I already got one. So that, I just thought it was really good. I don't normally, you know, pass out books in bulk, but I really liked this one. And it made me feel that it was time for me to smarten up and tidy up and get this done. So as annoyed as I get at my daughter sometimes, I don't want her to have to do this by herself, and I don't want to leave that kind of legacy for her. And I think that your family needs that. Hi, Lynn.
Lynn, you have a question? Please unmute. Yeah.
Yeah, I just did a quick search on for Blake's books, and there's like 10 different books, because I thought I let somebody else have one and I would order from them. There's a whole bunch of books called, yeah. So who's the?
This one's called "I'm Dead, Now What?"
Yeah, there's like 12 of those on here. Who's the author of that one?
This one is just, I don't think it has an author. It's from Peter Popper Press, and they're in New York. And it doesn't list, I looked at quite a few of them. And this is, I think this is an exclusive to their company. Because there's some of them that have a title that's similar, but there's nothing in it. It's like blank pages, and so it's more like a journal. And so it's, I just found that, you know where I got this? I got the first one. I bought it at Haliashi when I was killing time while my sister was in there spending the family fortune on jewelry So I had some time to kill, and so to speak, and I found it and I thought, that's perfect. That's exactly what I need to fill in the info that I'm lacking. So
Mm-hmm.
Is
Thank you.
their address?
their address is, let's see here. Well, you can visit them at www.peterpauper.com. PETERPAUPER.com. And they're in New York. And so let's see. And this company, he has a little thing about, they sell all kinds of books there. But this is the one I liked. And I looked at several. After I bought this one, I thought, well, I wonder if there's anything else like this, but it's Now What to Do. Important information about my belongings, business affairs, and wishes. And they're in White Plains, New York. And they're still kind of working at home. But, you know, the thing is with them, they sell mostly to businesses and things like that. So they just did this as kind of a favor to me because I was sort of whined about it a little bit and said, well, so they shipped it. So, well, I don't know, you know, I just thought people should have it. And so if I run out of these, I can call them up and I can order some more of them. But, you know, if Blake's can order them, it's the same price if from them or if you get it from Blake's or any bookstore that you like, or and it's also loose. It's kind of loose leafed, sort of. The pages will fold flat, if you can see this. It's spiral down. So you can also just copy these pages, the ones that are relevant, and make your own.
So you might want to Google, interesting obituaries or something. There's some obits out there that are really great, entertaining obituaries, and that's, to me, I love reading the ones, I don't even know the person, and it's just a fascinating story about someone's life. And there's some really funny ones out there too. Obituaries about, there was one I read, and I think it was on the Lost Coast Outpost a couple of years ago, and it was about this guy who basically spent his life drinking and philandering and gambling. That was his life. And his daughters did a beautiful job just writing up the story of this guy's life. And it was hilarious. And it also was kind of a tribute to him too, so they told it like it was. So you might want to Google something like that. You'll find all sorts of interesting things.
I also would like to mention, while I'm thinking about it, that Lynn, you made me think of it. I have been doing this writing group with some seniors at the McKinleyville Senior Center for a while, and now we're obviously all not going there. So I made a not so terrific attempt to learn how to use Zoom. It took us a while to get it down. But on Wednesday mornings at 10 o'clock, there's whoever's in town or wants to, if they just, I'll send them a link and they can click in and join us. And Lynn joined up and a couple of other people on here. And we just, if somebody's writing or they just want to tell a story or just talk or anything, it's really a nice group of people, and they're quite remarkable. And I have enjoyed their stories, listening to them more than about anything. There's a guy who grew up in Rio Dell, small town. He tells stories about what it was like to grow up in a mill town while it was still operating. And another one's 96. I was born in Minnesota, mustered out of the army and went on and got married. And here she is in McKinleyville, and just remarkable writer. And the things she remembers are just astounding. And, we've got one of the ladies who just joined up, rode the green turtle across country with her kids, and just pretty amazing. And there's another fellow in there he's in his mid 80s, who is this premier botanist and explorer. And he writes about shivering showers of cascading spiders while he's walking around up in the Trinity Alps. And he sees a rattlesnake in the middle of the path, and he describes how the beautiful blue colored it, which I cannot relate to one bit. But there's such an interesting group of people, and if you would like to join us, you're absolutely welcome. It's really fun. It may last for an hour, and it's they're fun.
It also,
Jack,
I wanted to say that.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say, like, I was describing this kind of rigid format of what an obit should be with the little beginning and the end and stuff. And I think that's a good place to start. But I also want to say that, you know, you can also violate all the rules if you want, go off in your own direction. So, you know, I think the format is a good place to start. And I do actually strongly feel that there are those elements of little pieces of information that really should be in the obit. But as you're writing it, maybe you go off in a whole new direction and you break new ground and violate every rule in the book and create a masterpiece. So go for it.
And then call up your best friend and share it with them.
Yeah, and then if you might find out that you made a giant mess, but that's okay. That's part of the fun, right?
Jack, do you get very many self-written obits?
You know, I don't think so. I think that most of them are actually compiled by the family. I think I've had a few, and I've had a few that you could tell that the family members were, at the very least, the family members were writing it while the person was still alive, because, you know, there's little quotes from the deceased in there and stuff. So yeah, I think I've had a few, but it's not common. I think most people kind of scramble after the fact to write it. And that's what makes it really difficult. It'd be a lot easier to have at least something, you know, if at least the very basic information was down, it would probably make it a lot easier for the family.
Are there any other questions?
Well, I was going to say there's a lot of templates online that you can look up that will give you that basic stuff, you know, that how they start. Or Jack, you probably have one.
No, you can see, actually, the Time Standard, you can go to their obit thing, and there's a form that you actually can fill out. So yeah, you can do that.
Doug? You need to turn on your mic. You need to unmute yourself.
How about
Good.
now? I'm 90 and my handwriting is somewhere between illegible and atrocious. And so what I did back in 97 was start a "To Whom It May Concern" letter on my computer. And I noticed the other day that I have updated it 22 times since then. And it's real easy to do and gives me a nice record, and it's real easy just to go in and change things, which I find I do. Also, I find that a lot of things that I wrote I had forgotten about. So that's another little hint that might help.
That's a great idea.
Another funny thing is when you're doing this kind of writing and you're writing about your life, you begin to kind of call into question what the truth really was, because your memory, you know, I find myself like, you know, if I'm trying to write about something that happened to me 20 years ago, you know, I get a little nervous, like, am I remembering this right? And so it kind of calls into question when autobiographical stuff, you're writing stuff like that, you know, how accurate is it? Oh, it's, you know, it's as accurate as your memory, I suppose.
I think I've unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I finally figured your name. It's Patti Stammer, but I did not get the email. How am I going to get that? And also,
Go ahead.
yes, I'd also like to ask if it's okay to write it in the first person.
Yes.
Real bad. Okay.
I think that's fine. I totally think that's fine. There's so many ways you could do it. I was trying to go with the really standard third person, which is kind of fun to write about yourself in the third person. But yeah, sure. I mean, why not? If you want to do first person, go for it. I don't know what other newspapers do, but I'm good with it.
I don't usually do anything standard.
That's fine. That's great. I love it. Yeah, I mean, our newspaper, we don't, you know, if you want to do first person, I think that's a neat way to do it. Go for it.
But die in Blue Lake, or you're in me, right? Well, I don't know. Maybe I'll die there.
And Willie, if you want to get further future invitations, go to OLLI at humboldt.edu, and there should be a link. Huh?
So
Pardon me?
the email would be there?
No, the email won't be there. The link there's a link to the brown bag lunch programs, and then you can request an invitation.
Oh, and
Or you
so
can call the OLLI line, the telephone number, which is 826-5880, and request an invitation for a specific one. When our new summer catalog comes out, which you should be getting any day, or you all got the email, I presume, saying when it's available and what the programs are, you will get a list of all the brown bag lunches from now through the end of August. So you can see what's coming, which is helpful.
and the address for the writers group and for the book contact information is the same. It's my name, P. Stammer, STAMMER @gmail.com. And there's a message on here from Pam that says, tell Willie that she can include that she never did anything the standard way in her obit.
Oh, so a little bit about the mechanics, just some simple stuff. When you have your obit, how do you get it to the newspaper? And I would recommend that you email, write up your obit. Make sure if people are going to be looking at it and editing it, don't send it until you're done with that process. The worst thing that you can do is to send a newspaper 5 different versions of the obit, and then you're hoping that the editor gets the final version that's been edited. So just wait until the family has looked at it, you've gone through all the edits, then send it. And you're going to want to send it through email, all typed up in an email, in a text document that can be copied and pasted. If you scan it and it's like a photo, what's the newspaper going to do? All the newspapers around here are understaffed. They don't have extra people sitting around waiting to do work. They're just scraping by. So if you send in like a photo of a handwritten obituary, they're going to have to print it out, and someone's going to have to spend half an hour typing it up. So don't do that. Just get it in a text document and email it. Email the photos, and that's how you're going to send it in. Kind of seems obvious, but I'll go to my office and someone will slip a handwritten obit under the door, and now I just realized that my work day has an extra half hour of typing that in, and hopefully I can read the handwriting. So, well,
I'd like to apologize for all the past editions of stories for the column that I sent you. I'm sorry.
Well, hopefully I ran the right version, right?
Oh no, don't do that one, do this one. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I apologize. And I really want to thank Ollie and Kim and Jane for setting this up. And I thank all of you for coming and listening, because this was, in the immortal words of my daughter, kind of a crapshoot, Mom. You think anybody's going to tune in to listen to that? I don't know. But I'm glad you did.
Sometimes crap shooting is really fun. So I think we've all enjoyed it. I want to thank you two for putting it together. It was originally going to be at the Senior Center in person. And I think we've done maybe even better doing this online, because it's much easier for everyone to access. So I want to thank you both, and we can clap if you want.